In this episode, I talked to Vancouver filmmaker Devan Scott about his film Preface to a History. Devan tells us about his film education, his inspirations, how he put together this experimental feature with his partner, collaborator Willa Ross, and we delve into the popcorn bucket for some random film questions. Welcome to the VIFF Podcast. This is your chance to get the inside track from the people behind the films you love and the films you are yet to discover. This podcast was recorded on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Recorded during the 43rd edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival, these conversations take us behind the scenes with the creators bringing their work to the big screen. I'm Tom Charity. This week I'm in conversation with Devan Scott. And Devan, welcome. Tell us about your film, Preface to a History.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I feel very welcome. Our film, Preface to a History, which I co-directed with my good friend and decades-long collaborator, Willa Ross, is a pseudo-experimental narrative feature in which two characters deal with their own kind of internal, mental health adjacent struggles in very different ways. One character, played by my friend Vlad, deals with his struggles by kind of burying himself in various audio-related media. So a lot of the film is actually just watching him walk across the screen, listening to audiobooks and podcasts, everything from the history of various failing nations to self-help to relationship podcasts. And Sophie, played by Sophie Ramvari, we like to name characters after their actors because it makes life very easy on set. And she is an architect who is dealing with kind of this realization that maybe she isn't actually enjoying her career, and she deals with it in very different ways. So the film's all shot. Actually, I think we walked by this location filming some of the Vancouver stuff, and on Pender Island out in the Gulf. So it's. I feel like it's a deeply uncommercial film. In fact, it's probably one where we reflexively tried to make it as, unmarketable as possible. And
that's why you're here.
Yeah, that's why we're here. That's why we like it. We like it that way. So I guess here I am marketing my unmarketable 1 hour long pseudo-experimental film.
So, I don't know, does this qualify as your first feature in your mind?
Oh, it depends on it depends on if Telefilm is asking or not. But to me, I'd say it's my first self-directed narrative feature. Let's call it that.
Okay.
I'm trying to qualify. I'm what do you call it? I'm moving the goalpost very selectively there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back and explore where you come from and your collaboration with Willa. Where are you in your career? I know that you have a career as a cinematographer and as a colorist, but you've been making short films since when?
Really since I was 11.
Yeah.
My first film was called Mission Difficult. And we just stole the ending from GoldenEye by videotaping a TV screen with the end of GoldenEye playing. And that's where my career started. But no, I'd say I've been seriously making short films since, I think, if I had to say, when did, what's the earliest short film I'd be comfortable showing someone and hoping they don't totally write me off? It's probably my grad film from film school back in 2013, which somehow got into TIFF, much to, I think, there were some regrets about that because of how wacky it was. But I'd say, so about 10 years I've been making short films and, the occasional documentary, and also just, making experiments on my own. I've kind of, Willa and I have, over the years, kind of slowly realized that the art that we make, that we get kind of internal fulfillment from, it might be best to separate that from the work that pays the bills. So I don't think we really see ourselves as trying to make a career making making, directing movies in that way. We just do it because we love doing it, and if anyone else wants to see them, that's great. But the others, so my career is kind of a weird multivalent thing in that way, if that makes sense. I feel like I answered around your question instead of answering it.
Well, where did you go to film school?
Simon Fraser University.
And was that always the goal? When did you decide that cinematography was going to be kind of the way you were going to earn your living as opposed to directing? How did that split happen?
It was a funny kind of path because I went to SFU because I wanted to design video games. I was a computer science major for a year. And then I realized it was badly timed because I started to grow out of video games, at least the way I put it, or at least my own personal appreciation of them at around the age of 18 or 19, which is when I went to computer science to do video games. And I started a film criticism blog with Willa. We just wrote our own movie reviews back in the old pre-social media days. And I was getting so much more fulfillment out of that, I decided I wanted to be a film critic. And so I signed up for SFU Film School, and somehow they accepted me. I mean, that egg on their face. But and so it was kind of throughout the course of film school that I kind of bashed around ideas for what I wanted to do, but I ended up kind of glomming onto cinematography because I realized I just loved the act of composing frames. For me, the geometry of doing it kind of feels like this weird fusion of math, like trigonometry and art, in a way that really tickles me. So I just started instinctively liking it. But I mean, for a while I wanted to be an editor, and then I realized I have no patience for anything in life, and editing is a really patient art. So I was not good at that, and cinematography really lends itself to my impatient, instant gratification style of art making. It's part of why I don't shoot on film, because I don't like waiting for things to develop.
And the collaboration with Willa?
We actually started when we were 16. We ended up happening to go to basically a summer camp called Gulf Island Film School back when it was open in 2006 or so. And we met there and immediately butted heads and didn't get along. And then we ended up reconnecting over back when it was like Windows Messenger, when we were both just like lonely late teenagers. And she was having, I'd say, a rough time at University of Victoria in a different major. And I said, hey, you should apply to SFU. It's pretty fun. It's a fun time over here. And then she got in the year after I did. And so we became roommates and kind of just started collaborating on a lot since then. So it was a real kind of a long story. I guess we met almost 20 years ago. A while to think about.
Okay, let's turn to Preface to a History, and what was the origin story for putting this together? As you say, it's a very experimental piece. Was the original impulse as a kind of technical formal experiment, or was it to explore psychology and emotions, those things?
Actually, it's unusual for me in that it has a very specific origin story and just a personal experience I had. I had just started listening to it's like a 105-hour audiobook trilogy by Richard Evans called the Third Reich trilogy, but it's the history of the Weimar Republic all the way to a little bit after the end of World War II. Basically, it's what the heck happened in Germany between the years 1914 or post-Bismarck and pre-partition. And so I was listening to the audiobook version of that, which I do, in Bluetooth headphones walking around. And as I was getting to the really dark parts of the first book, which details the downfall of democracy in the Weimar Republic, I was invited, Anya, my wife, was invited by some friends to do a ski trip up to, I think it was Big White or something. It was one of those really insular ski resorts, that feels like, it doesn't feel like you're on planet Earth. It was my first time ever going to one of those. And I, at that time, did not ski. I used to ski, but I forgot how. So I just said, hey, I just want to chill in the cabin and just write a bit and read a bit. So I ended up spending 3 or 4 days just in this lap of, to me, luxury, in this ski resort with nothing but people wealthy enough to be there, walking around in the snow. It was a whiteout, and I would just exist in bars and coffee shops all day while everyone else was skiing, listening to this audiobook. And I started getting very anxious and almost in a productive way, because what I was listening to was so horrible that the irony between the things I was listening to and what I was seeing became very interesting to me. So when I would hear about, Joseph Goebbels, in quotations, talking about the downfall of democracy, about how, the enemies of democracy, are given the tools with which to dismantle it by people who actually believe in democracy. It was a very dark time in my kind of book reading life, and I thought, okay, there's something here in these conflicting sensory impulses, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and even the humor of, my God, if people around me knew what I was listening to, they would think I was sketch. And so I just thought, what if I shot this? What if I just, literally just found someone to, put headphones on and walk across these big cityscapes? Because I thought that kind of big cityscapes would be inherently a bit more interesting. And then I ended up kind of saying, okay, what if he's on vacation on Pender Island, which is my usual kind of home away from home? And it kind of built out from there, and we ended up shooting the scenes of Vlad walking across Vancouver about 6 months before everything else as kind of a proof of concept to ourselves of, does this formal scheme work, where what the audience is hearing is, the sound perspective is in Vlad's head. So you're hearing the actual book I was listening to, The Coming of the Third Reich, as Vlad is walking directly on the speakers, but you're also hearing the cityscape kind of peek through. So you're experiencing the oral and visual world of this guy. And we liked what happened, so we decided to go ahead with shooting the rest of it. And the film took like 6 or 7 days to shoot total, over the course of about 6 months. So it was, I probably went a bit further.
When were you in the ski resort?
I think I was in the ski resort in the winter of 2018, 2019, and we shot Vlad walking through the city in May of 2019, which I have an interesting story about that, because we had to delay some of it because I got food poisoning halfway through shooting it. And then we shot the rest of it on Pender Island in like kind of around Thanksgiving of that year. So it was all shot 5 years ago. And then COVID totally kiboshed our post-production for a while, and then that's its own thing.
I mean, it's funny, not funny at all, that it feels so relevant to the politics of today with Project 25 and all that, which, I mean, I know ever since Trump emerged that there have been fears of reascendant fascism, but if anything, it feels even more relevant now.
Yeah, it's that kind of because when I'm one of my bad habits is I listen to too many news podcasts, right? And it's like my commute listening. And I started getting into audiobooks to get away from that. But then I realized by listening to this 100-hour-long audiobook about the downfall of a democracy, I was basically just sublimating that into something that is a little more respectable to say, oh, I'm listening to history books. No, I'm still just wallowing in my anxiety of, because I was listening to it while Trump was president, and that was a scary time, in my opinion, for global stability and democracy. And so I ended up, there's a bit of that in the film, of that sense of the character is almost staring at the sun, right, to no real avail. Yeah.
I mean, I had this picture of you at the ski resort, and it's somehow it's echoing Hitler's retreat up in the Alps. And it feels like a perfect kind of fascist nightmare.
Well, just listening to about the late Weimar aristocracy and like the conservatives who were kind of all cloistered and very insulated from the actual events of the world, and just being in essentially the modern equivalent of that space, it was frightening in a very diffuse way, in a very abstract way that I kind of enjoyed.
I mean, it does seem like I know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about this kind of disjuncture between your private space when you've got headphones in and the world around you, and that kind of disassociation. And that seems to be a very 21st century experience, where half the time we're in these virtual worlds, and that seems to be almost taking over.
It's an interesting thing because it has a personal valence for me. Because as someone with autism, I do a lot of what I only recently was given words for, which is called stimming, right? Which is you kind of control the stimuli that enter you. So, for example, I find it hard to walk down the street without wearing like something noise canceling in my ears, and then filling that space with my own thing. Like I'm frequently like I found out how on my phone to listen to music and audiobooks at the same time. So I'll have like a background of music going and audiobooks going, just so I can curate my own mental state to keep myself on an even keel. Because if to me the sound of a truck going by me is like a stab in the heart, right? It's really tough for me to deal with. But if I can cancel that out, I can actually kind of exist in that world a little better.
And you're creating a soundtrack to the book.
Exactly, right?
That's awesome. I didn't know you could do that.
Oh, it's fun. No, it's the Android life, I like being able to curate my own, kind of moments like that, right? Where sometimes, if I'm like landing on an airplane, I'll play what I feel is appropriate music, it's soundtracking my life is a lot of fun.
But the film is also about this couple and the dynamics between them and the relationship, which seems to be, part of it is the guy's, Vlad's failure to communicate his feelings, mm-hmm. which is something that we may recognize from real life. I don't know. But it's not only that. On her side, she's also got frustrations and dissatisfactions.
Yeah, because on her side, we kind of theorized that his kind of mental health struggle would be one of these like long wallows in a mood, and hers would be kind of. I feel like both characters are a slight split of my own hang-ups, where sometimes I need to wallow in a space and cut out everything around me, and other times I need to just move on to the next thing. As soon as I get antsy in a situation, I'm like, end this situation. I need to move on. And so she has a slightly more kind of high-paced rhythm to her own mental health issues. So her scenes, for example, when she's discussing building a house with a client, we went out of our way to film that in the exact opposite of the way we shot Vlad's stuff. So with her scenes, it's all shot on telephoto lenses. We deliberately got a ton of coverage and just have a much faster average shot length, deliberately, and we added a lot of post zooms. Just we also love Robert Altman in this household, so a lot of that. But trying to externalize the way that her own mental health struggles are different. So instead of listening to a slow audiobook, she'll blast punk rock, right? Or I should say, in the final film, electronic music, nicely provided by local composer and musician Gil Galetsky, who did a great job on it. But we pulled from their album. So there is that difference there between the two of them that we tried to delineate. And I guess it's up to audiences to see if that actually makes it through.
Was there a problem getting the rights to use like the audiobook and things?
That was a long process. That took years to negotiate, and a few $1,000s. Right. But basically how we did it was we managed to get the rights to the text of the book. Basically what you hear in the film is a very highly curated and selected, like 3,000 words or so from around the first book. So it's actually like a mishmash of like the actual preface and like the middle and the ending of the book. I reread the book went through the book a couple of times to pull what I thought were the most coherent quotes, because kind of boiling down of a 55-hour, which is that first one, it's 35-hour long audiobook to only 20 minutes of stuff. It's hard to make it coherent. So we basically said, okay, we want these words, and it's actually our sound engineer who did the voice for that. So that was all re-recorded. And it actually took some doing to get the performance, which is interesting because you don't think of audiobook reading as a performance, but it is. You need to direct which words to emphasize, which is kind of fun. Yeah. Yeah, and most of the podcasts are complete fabrications too. Those are all just our friends that we got into my podcasting studio to to just riff. We basically got them to parody other podcasts that we couldn't get the rights to.
The shoot itself on Pender Island, largely aside from the city walks that you talked about, even there you're working with a really small crew, right? Mm-hmm.
It was me, Willa, and Vlad, who was our co-lead, was also our sound engineer, because that's actually he's not a professional actor, although I think he's a really talented actor. He is a professional sound engineer in the industry, and we just was like, hey, bring your stuff, and he did. And so depending on whether he was on camera or not, he'd be the one mixing or not. And then we had a couple of people rotate out. Susanna for the first half of the shoot, and then Paige for the second half of the shoot, as our kind of all-purpose, costume camera assistant, everything, focus puller, depending on what we needed. So we never had more than like 3 active crew members, basically, which was great. I loved it. It was an ideal shooting situation. We didn't bring any lights either, so we had to just move lamps.
And how scripted was it?
Our script was around 20 pages, and a lot of the script was kind of done in a very kind of like almost like lecture notes way, where you have like a bullet point as like, here's a plot beat the characters have to hit. So none of the dialogue scene was line by line scripted. It was basically at some point hit this beat. So they just wound their way to that beat. So for example, there's a recurring dialogue scene that we cut to. It's the 2 characters sitting on a couch. That was actually done, that take is a single about 40-minute take that we just did without a break. And that was the one good take we got, because what happened was we were all fairly intoxicated. It was someone's birthday. And we, and at one point, I forget who, someone basically went, I want to shoot the climax now. And it was like 11 at night. And so we just drunkenly set up the camera, set up the sound. The sound wasn't great, and then we just shot the climax for like 40 minutes, and that ended up being the backbone of the film. So that was kind of the energy on the set, where at any given point we could decide to shoot or not shoot. Sometimes we would just go, we don't feel like shooting this afternoon. We're just gonna let's do it tomorrow. We're not feeling it. Sometimes we'd be, we're gonna shoot this in 2 days. We need to do it now because I'm feeling it. So it was a very loose shoot with very little scripting.
What are the advantages and the drawbacks of using friends or non-professional actors to kind of carry your film?
The cool thing was both of our actors are very talented directors in their own right, and that was why we picked them. Vlad was still, I think, one of the most empathetic directors of actors I've ever met. He made a huge impression on me because he was in my year at film school, and I shot his grad film, and his way of working with actors inspired me completely. And so I always thought, okay, I need to get if I ever need to cast someone in a role like weird experimental film, he's always been in the back of my head as like someone I really want to work with in that way. And Sophie is an incredibly talented director of herself. Right, in her hybrid documentaries, she films herself, and I thought, okay, she'll understand what we're going for, because the working methods of this film were heavily influenced by our collaborations, and so that actually, but they both had very different working methods, which is fun. Vlad was a very 10th take guy, like he needed to ease into the scene, ease into the character, work his way up. Sophie was a take 1 actor. It was a very McCabe, Mrs. Miller, like Warren Beatty versus Julie Christie thing in that way. And we usually went with like the first take anyway, because we felt it was the most raw and interesting. But there were no huge struggles with that, because even though if neither was a professional actor, they were both professional directors, and so they knew how to work with themselves, which is kind of fun.
Were there surprises along the way? If you're turning these 20 pages into a film of an hour's length, do you think that where you ended up was significantly different to where you expected?
I think so I have one good onset story of a surprise, and there's a scene where a big pivotal moment where Sophie's character is talking to the client, and we didn't plan for this, but her character kind of breaks professionalism at one point and asks her client, like after he's just been kind of he's kind of a low-key jerk. She asks, are you happy? And that was a complete improv, and that ended up being a linchpin to her character. We ended up, so there were certain points at which we went, oh, this is a great beat that the actors just stumbled into. The guy playing the client, by the way, is just like, he was just like the manager of a development of cabins on the island, and also a non-actor. The big kind of serendipitous part for me was in the editing, where, because we shot the short, and we shot the feature, and the feature was the Pender Island stuff. And the short was a 22-minute, just Vlad walking across Vancouver. They were supposed to be 2 separate works originally.
Really?
So it was supposed to be a 20-minute short, and then 60 minutes on Pender Island. And we... Willa is always much more willing to like break from the plan than I am. In post, I'm always like, let's just do it the way we thought of it. Like, let's just execute our plan. And Willa is actually an actual creative person. So she said, no, let's try restructuring it. And so we just spent like literally years at a very slow pace, kind of going, okay, so let's try it with, let's bisect the short film, let's intercut the short film with it. So we ended up with this very complex editing pattern and a 20-minute shorter film than we had ever anticipated. I think it's a much better film than our initial plan. That's why I'm not an editor. But so that kind of process led us to a much weirder, more nonlinear story, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm
actually, for example,
I'm really surprised to hear this.
Like the chronology of the film. Like, for example, you know how so the Vancouver stuff takes place chronologically in this film after the island stuff. In the initial plan, this plan went into post-production. The Vancouver stuff was supposed to take place before the island stuff. But guess what happened? Vlad messes up shaving the day before we depart for the island. So he has a long beard in the Vancouver stuff, and then almost clean shaven. He looks much younger in the island stuff. And so that we realized that lent itself to a reading of the island stuff happening earlier. So we went, okay, the island stuff is now first in the story because of the beard. And it didn't change how we shot it. We realized this after we shot the movie. So we reordered it completely, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. So this was all shot 5 years ago. You consider it a 2024 film, though?
I don't know. I mean, I consider it a 2024 film for festival eligibility reasons, but to me, it still feels like I can see my 2019 fingerprints on the footage. Although I hope, knock on wood, I'm a better colorist than I was. So I consider it my 2019 self hiring my 2024 self as a colorist and doing a bang up job fixing my mistakes. So it's kind of a 2019 to 2024 film for me. Weirdly shot pre-COVID, but it feels like a post-COVID film in some ways.
Well, let's talk about the aesthetic choices that went into color and sound. Mm-hmm. Let's start with color, shall we? You've mentioned Altman.
Mm-hmm.
What other kind of models were you thinking of?
It's funny, I don't usually have models when doing color in my own films. I usually just I usually audition a bunch of film stocks, because what I do a workflow where I can basically, the thing about digital cameras is that anything can look like anything. Like, we're being shot in like Blackmagic Pocket 6K is probably processed with like a Rec 709 basic like lookup table. Basically means that they look like you'd expect a Blackmagic Pocket 6K to look. But if you, about 10 seconds as a colorist, you can make it look like expired Fujifilm from the 70s, right? It's not that difficult to get that base look. But the real kind of tough part was working within limitations of the cameras. So, for example, we were shooting in we had no lighting, so we were shooting in extremely contrasty scenarios. So a lot of post-production color was shooting so that we could bracket our exposures to get more night sky and stuff in certain shots. But to me, in post-production, deciding the look of the film was more about going, okay, how do we honor our intent from 5 years ago, while essentially using what I've learned in the intervening 5 years to better process the image, to essentially maybe buffer off some of the rough edges of the Blackmagic Pocket 4K's weird way of dealing with out of gamut traffic signals, that sort of thing. But it was more just kind of going, okay, this film stock that we're using, digital film stock, it grabs onto like color contrast in the footage that I like. Initially, the 2019 film was way more desaturated and it had kind of a bleach bypass effect. And the 2024 one is way more saturated, because I realized that the autumnal colors of Pender Island, it was shot in the autumn, beautiful, beautiful leaves on the ground. I wanted to accentuate those. I wanted it to feel like this almost like aching end of season feeling, right? So that was kind of at the forefront more than any kind of specific movie reference. Obviously, the compositions are directly referring to certain films. We have 3 or 4 specific filmmakers I really, really wanted to just not ape, but to infuse some of their feeling it to the film.
Such as?
A big one was Chantal Akerman. News from Home is a big influence on the film, where that film has the juxtaposition between the narrated letters you're hearing and these shots of New York. Jacques Tati was a big one because Playtime is a film where it's just these wide shots where you can he gives you room to build your own movie. And we wanted to get some of that, but without the choreography. We just wanted to film people in Vancouver illegally in wide shot without permits and let them do what they will, right? So there's certain scenes where a cyclist goes by on like a rusty bicycle, and we just kept as much of that sound as possible because we thought that's great. That's that it felt like Vancouver to us. And then the third one was James Benning. Especially there's a film he did in 2012-13. It blew my mind because I was assigned to project it at VIFF called Stemple Pass. It's about the Unabomber. It's just 4 shots of a cabin, every 3 seasons, and you hear the Unabomber writing his manifesto over it. It opened my mind to durational cinema and to the idea that you can actually externalize a character's emotions by keeping yourself at a remove if you want to achieve a certain effect. So those all really played into how we shot the film.
And sound?
Sound was interesting because the short film was mixed in stereo, which I really wanted to mix it in 5.1 because we kind of had this idea of sound. Willa is a terrific sound editor. I'm not good at sound editing, but I think my one kind of thing I like in sound is I'm a surround sound fanatic. I love geometry and sound. For this film, I thought, okay, I want to have 2 diegeses because you have the diegetic sound, which is sound in the in the film. So you have to ask yourself, okay, is our sound perspective the camera? Is our sound perspective Vlad? And so someone in front of him, you hear in the center. Is our sound perspective inside Vlad's head? So when you hear it, so imagine you have front speaker, left, right, back, that. Our plan ended up being that we would essentially mix the entire film in a somewhat traditional way in terms of the external audio. So, dialogue floating across the front 3 channels, ambience surrounding you. And we built out that ambience to a huge degree. Matt Stefansson, our re-recording mixer, was immensely patient with all of our weird experimentation. He did a great job. But all of the podcasts are done exactly from inside Vlad's head. So the minute a podcast starts, we've mixed it so that if you're in the sweet spot in the cinema, you hear it sounds like you're wearing headphones because there's no attempt to worldize it. There's no attempt to make it frontal or rear. It's just in the middle of the soundscape. So you get this strange sensation where you're hearing the real world around you, but it's being blotted out and leveled depending on what we want to emphasize by this kind of incredibly immediate. Like there's a point at which a podcast starts and it's this overpowering, incredibly cheesy intro, with music and stuff, and it just immediately takes you out of the movie, which is the point. I guess we have a bit of Andy Kaufman in us where we like to, people will think their TVs are broken, that sort of thing, which is kind of fun.
I guess I haven't asked the obvious question about the collaboration and how that works with you and Willa in terms of, who's in charge? How do you arrive at a consensus?
In the context of making our own movies, we've had I think a really consistent even-handed collaboration because we both have our own strengths that we realize. Willa loves working with actors directly. I love kind of directing that direction a little sometimes, where I'll be like, hey, I was thinking this for this take, and then Willa will make it. She'll make it understandable for the actors and actually do the hard part of the direction. But she, I would say, is the one who does the traditional direction of the actors, basically. I basically am a cinematographer on the shoot. I handle the camera, lighting, but all of our decisions are basically worked out usually really rigorously ahead of time. So we'll talk through every camera angle. Like for this film, every single shot was storyboarded by us walking through the locations, taking photos and talking through them. And then we would select the frames we liked and then essentially recreate those for the film, sometimes months in advance. And so there's this nice division of duties where we both plan together, but on the day we we have our own little fiefdoms, but we're very open to, like, sometimes Willa will have an amazing idea for a shot on the day, and we'll do that, and it's great. And sometimes I'll have I'll be like, oh, can you give me like an as if you're on cocaine direction or something, to an actor, and I'll usually give something like big and brash like that, and sometimes it'll get the performance we want. So we're very comfortable with kind of intruding on each other's real estate on the day. And then in post-production, I'm like the classic direction of editing, where I'll be like, I have a color studio, so I'll be like just sitting on the couch being like, try this, and then just like, do my own thing for 10 minutes, and Willa will like, okay, I did it, and then we'll watch it, and then we will kind of iterate that into something that works. So I'm in the editing room, I kind of am the lazy director more often than not, and Willa does all the hard work of actually making the film good. And then in the finishing stages, I will basically color it on my own. I'll just do it on my own. Willa will come in and give notes, and then I'll do a final pass, and that's usually a very quick process. And then she'll do the hard work of doing all the sound editing, and then in this case, we then pass that sound edit off to Matt, who made it sound amazing.
Have you got anything else you'd like to add about what you are hoping from sharing the film with the world? Before we move on, we have some random popcorn bucket questions to go through shortly. So any last words on the film before it's out there? Now you can let it go after 5 years.
I think, Willa and I see eye to eye in a few ways, but one such way is that we are formalists first, right? I think we get our kicks from experimenting with the film form. To me, it's, I was watching this interview with Jacques recently, and he just says at one point, I don't care about story. And I thought I felt very, very represented. So to me, I don't see myself as a storyteller. I don't see myself as as someone where I'm like, we need to share the story. I'm just like, hey, we've made an art object that I personally get kicks out of, and it's very exciting to like see something that you are proud of on screen. And then if people want to come and bounce off of it in either ways that are just baffling or ways where they really connect with it, that's a lot of fun. And I can't wait to hear what people think, as long as they sit in the sweet spot of the surround sound, so like 5th row back in the Van City Theater. So as long as you do that, you'll get a great experience.
VIFF Center, please.
VIFF Center, Van City Theater at the VIFF Center?
Yes,
there we go.
VIFF.org, folks. Okay. I am putting my hand in the popcorn bucket, and I am pulling out a question which I will have to remove my glasses to be able to read. What film character would be the worst roommate, and why?
The first one that comes to mind is Godzilla, because you'd immediately die of radiation. That'd be bad.
Why don't you pull one out?
All right. Okay. Let's see. Which film scene do you want to live out in real life? I would really like... I don't know. It's more like, to me, I'm going to reinterpret this question as, which film world do I want to live in, right? Which diegesis appeals to me? And I would love to live in, I would love to, I watched a Bruce Springsteen concert film about his Tempe concert in November 1980. I want to go to that concert, so that's the scene I want to live out. I want to see Bruce Springsteen at his peak. I'm still waiting on his Vancouver show, so, that's my answer.
Only 2 more months.
Yeah.
And what's the best film you've ever seen on a bad date?
Oh, I've only ever been on one bad date. And we saw, and the reason it was bad, it was very...
That's a pretty good record.
Yeah, I know, knock on wood. But I've been on one bad date, and it was not because of anyone's fault. It's because it was a date to VIFF in 2009. And at some point it was decided that we were going to see Antichrist. We saw Antichrist. And so the reason the date was bad was Antichrist.
I think that was somebody's fault.
Terrifically nice person. It wasn't my idea, I'll tell you that. But terrifically nice person, but we did see Antichrist in 2009. If you're listening, person I saw Antichrist with, I'm sure there's no hard feelings on either side, but that was a tough movie to see at 11 in the morning. People were running out there screaming. It was at Empire 7 Cinemas. I remember that well.
It's Lars von Trier's fault.
It's all Lars von Trier.
Okay, last one. What's the most bizarre or weird film prop you've ever seen?
Film prop? I don't know. I mean, I like for some reason I'm thinking of that baby from American Sniper. That's supposed to be a real baby, but looked like a doll.
Right, you're right.
Part of me wants to say that the spoon pictures from The Room.
That was
that's
Brechtian,
a classic.
I think, the baby.
The baby was Brechtian. Yes, accidentally Brechtian. If it's accidental, is it still Brechtian? If it's Clint Eastwood going one take, it'll look great. I don't know.
That was in Clint Eastwood's chair period. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if he can be trusted at that point. He did vote for Romney. I don't know.
Devan, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's a lot of fun. Thank you, and thanks for hosting this. It's great fun, and thanks to camera operators and everyone else. It's a good show. Showbiz.
I have a little outro to read. You've been listening to the VIFF Podcast. Thanks to our community broadcast partner, Tell Us Story Hive, for their support. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review the podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And visit viff.org to learn more about the Vancouver International Film Festival and see what's on at the VIFF Centre year-round. In this episode, I talked to Vancouver filmmaker Devan Scott about his film Preface to a History. Devan tells us about his film education, his inspirations, how he put together this experimental feature with his partner, collaborator Willa Ross, and we delve into the popcorn bucket for some random film questions.